everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a story time slash continuation of a previous series where I talk about my experience as an archaeologist in training on field school. Today we're going to cover my field school in Bulgaria, which I attended as a part of my studies for a master's in human osteoarchaeology at the University of Edinburgh. I have previously done videos about my 3 summers digging in the Kingdom of Jordan as a part of my undergrad, and you can find those either linked here or in the description box below. If you would like to support my channel, please consider giving me a subscribe and hitting the bell notification for every time that I make new videos. Or you could watch the ad that will be placed halfway through this video. All right, let's dig in. This goes all the way back to the spring-summer of 2014 and is the last time that I ever went on an academic field school as opposed to working as an archaeologist. This field school was a very different experience to the field schools that I was on during my undergraduate degree for a couple different reasons. Firstly, it was actually not required as a part of my degree. Going on a field school and passing it as like an academic course was a part of my undergrad degree. So this one is a bit more unusual in that it was kind of entirely voluntary and not required as a part of my studies or as something that I needed to do in order to pass my master's. There was a choice of field schools that we could attend, and it was, I would say, maybe encouraged to go, especially if you were perhaps planning on using the material at these schools as a part of your thesis. As many of you know, I love going on field school. It's a great experience, and I had enough money to be able to afford it at the time, so it should come as no surprise that I decided to go. Another big difference was that it was actually 3 weeks long instead of the 6 weeks that all of my Jordan field schools were. The shortened field season and the fact that this smaller field school meant that we were staying somewhere where we actually had to like live and cook our own meals meant that this was considerably cheaper than my previous field schools in Jordan, which were definitely a couple $1,000s each time that I went, with like flights, tuition, and accommodation included. For this one, I only had to pay for my flights and my accommodation for the 3 weeks I was over there, plus like any spending money that I wanted for buying souvenirs or whatever. I can't remember exactly how much it cost, but I know that it was less than £1,000. So it was way more affordable than my previous ones. We left in the beginning of May and flew to Burgas Airport, which is on the Black Sea coast of Bulgaria. And for the duration of the school, we were staying in the old town of Nessebar, which I've again previously talked about a little bit, the history of the place in my video about my dissertation, because I did end up writing it on Nessebar and some of the human skeletal material that we looked at from there. It is a very nice seaside kind of like little resort town. We stayed on the actual old town, which used to be like an island. It's connected now by a man-made isthmus to the mainland. That's just like a road. It's a very scenic, nice place. We went in May primarily to avoid tourist season, because obviously that drives up a lot of the cost of hotels and staying there, flights, etc., and meant there's like a lot more people around. When we were there, the place was pretty dead. It was basically us, maybe a couple other tourists, and the locals, which was actually like quite a nice experience, because it kind of sometimes felt like you had the place to yourself, or the places that you were seeing to yourself. Nessebar also happens to be across the bay from the infamous Sunny Beach, which is a resort town very much known for its wild nightlife, and as a place where a lot of teenagers like to go and drunk on their school holidays, which, like, fair enough to you if that's your kind of fun, but I'm quite glad that we weren't there during peak season, because even towards the end of the trip we could hear the music from all the nightclubs like echoing across the water at night, which was like almost loud enough to keep you from sleeping, particularly if you're a sensitive or light sleeper. The weather during the time that we were there was really nice. It wasn't quite hot enough to really be walking around in shorts all the time, but it wasn't so cold that you always needed a jacket. In the mornings it was cooler, warmed up during the day, and it was nice and sunny most of the time we were there. Probably the biggest safety concern of this entire field school, and something that should be noted by anyone that's ever planning on visiting Nessebar, is the seagulls. Beware of the seagulls. They are very aggressive and they are not afraid of you. I'm not 100% sure why, but apparently for some reason, because of the fact that the entire island is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, it means that they can't really control the seagull population maybe as much as they would like, and the seagulls have learned to live with us. and they are very hungry. If you are walking around Nessebar with food, especially during like peak season when there's lots of tourists around, do not be surprised if you find yourself in a scene that reminds you of the horror film The Birds, when a bunch of seagulls might surround you or they're everywhere, because they are looking to steal your food. And the minute that you look away or you leave it unattended, it's gone like that. I actually saw a seagull steal a pizza out of someone's hand while I was in Nessebar. Nessebar Old Town is a very quaint little place. It's very small. You could walk from one end of the island to the other in less than a half hour very easily, and it's very much driven by tourism. There's a lot of hotels and restaurants, etc. And it's very famous for the fact that it per capita has the most churches per person on like a concentrated piece of land. There are 40 churches still surviving today. This is why the whole island is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. There would be no point in making each individual church one. They've just made the entire island one. When we were there, we stayed in like a local hotel. It wasn't staffed because it wasn't like the beginning of the season. We'd made an arrangement to basically rent out the rooms, but we didn't have like people cooking breakfast for us or like at a front desk. There was someone that came and cleaned every couple days for us, but that apart from that, we were pretty much at our own, and we had free run of the place. We had access to their whole kitchen, so we could make ourselves meals. We also had Wi-Fi the whole time we were there, and we shared rooms. I shared a room with 2 other girls while I was there, which was perfectly comfortable and fine. Because we didn't have meals being provided for us, we were basically, the whole group was responsible for feeding ourselves. And the way this kind of worked out, it was that we would kind of go grocery shopping once a week, and then source all of our kind of breakfast and lunches ourselves, and then we would trade off who cooked the evening meal amongst the entire group of us that went. I know that I was a bit apprehensive about this because I was, and I still am, what a lot of people would consider to be a picky eater. In particular, I really don't like seafood, but we managed, and I think one of the reasons I got around that was by volunteering to cook probably the majority of the meals, and nobody complained, so it worked out for me. In total, there were 8 of us on the project, which is again a big contrast from my Jordan field schools where there were like 40 odd people each year. The group that went consisted of my professor and thesis supervisor. She was the head of the project that we were working on. She also had 2 of her PhD students coming along who were working on the collections as a part of their PhDs, and then there were 5 master's students, including myself. The majority of the rest of my class, we were actually like 3 different degrees that all took the majority of our classes together, went on a different field school to the island of Ibiza with the forensics professor and did a field school there. Ours was a bit more archaeology concentrated, and theirs was more about forensics. And a couple people actually decided not to go on field school at all. They either had found collections already in the UK or at the university to write their theses on, or they didn't need to go and do this extra stuff to write their theses. And I know at least one person who actually started working in commercial archaeology in May through the summer while we were all writing our theses, and she managed to balance working full-time with also writing and submitting her thesis. We weren't actually there to dig for this field school. It was more what I would call a lab season. We were actually there to analyze and record human remains that had been dug up on an archaeological dig a couple years prior, and we were contributing to the big catalog of everything that had happened on site in kind of the post-excavation part of the dig. The space we worked in was the Nessebar Ethnographic Museum, so we had access to kind of their like backyard patio area and a couple rooms indoors, not the actual museum bit, but like the office bit behind it, I guess, to work in. And this was where all of our material was stored, so we would kind of go into the storehouse, take out what we needed for the day, and then just get to work. The way the day kind of shaped up was that we would have to be at the museum by, I want to say, 8 or 8:30, I can't exactly remember, which was a really nice change from the 4 a.m. wake-ups that I used to have to do in Jordan. And then we would work a few hours in the morning, take a break for lunch, and then work another couple of hours in the afternoon before going home for dinner. So it was very typical of kind of like an average work day. We would get the material that we would be working on for that day. Some of us, and I'm fairly confident that we actually divided everything into kind of stations of different work to do. So there were some people cleaning bones, there were some people analyzing bones, and some people putting stuff in a database, etc. And we moved around all the stations. We would clean the bones with dry brushing so we wouldn't submerge them in water. And then you lay them out anatomically on a table or whatever, and then use your textbooks and knowledge that you've gained in all of your classes so far to analyze the skeleton for things like sex, age at death, any pathology, stature, the quality of the preservation, etc. Once we had all that information, it would then get entered into the big massive Excel spreadsheet that we had that was the catalog of all of the human remains for the site. Probably the most exciting part of the actual work of the field school for me wasn't actually related to the original work and theses stuff that I was doing, but actually came when we were given the opportunity to excavate and analyze 2 vampire burials. I say vampire because it is not vampire in the context that most Western people would think it, but basically in Bulgaria they have a burial tradition most popular in the medieval ages, but I think dating back to the 4th century CE, that they thought some people were going to rise back from the dead, and so when that person was buried they did stuff to try and ensure that that wouldn't happen, which ranged from putting iron stakes through their chest to weighing the graves down with a bunch of very, very heavy stones. So I think it's actually like closer to what we think of like zombies rather than vampires, but vampire burials is the term that gets used when they talk about them. So these weren't related to the collection that we were working on originally, but my professor who ran the project, she was an associate of the local archaeologist in charge of the island, and earlier that year during a dig they had found these 2 burials and they needed them analyzed and examined. So we were given the opportunity to do that for them. There is a theory that this was done to people who potentially died under mysterious circumstances or committed suicide, or perhaps had mental or physical disabilities obvious enough to kind of set them apart from the crowd and make people feel superstitious of them. So like I said, we were given 2 vampires to kind of semi-excavate and analyze. One of them was a younger individual who was, for lack of a better word, encased in a very, very hard sediment that honestly reminded me of like cement. And meant that we had to kind of attempt to chip away at it to try and get the bones out so that we could look at them, which was quite a time-intensive process, but we did manage it eventually. There was another individual as well who had been buried with the aforementioned iron object, knife, etc. through their heart. I don't remember a lot of the specifics about the vampires because it was quite a long time ago, and I haven't actually seen any articles or anything about them since then that I could like refresh my memory with. But as far as I can remember, the older one definitely had some weird stuff going on pathologically that made us think that it kind of fit this theory that people with obvious disabilities were looked upon with suspicion and treated to these kind of, and therefore were buried in this way. Looking at those was definitely kind of a highlight of the field school, I think probably for all of us, certainly myself. And it was very cool because they made it into the news and everything. Having such a small team on the site was really a nice change. It meant that we built up a really nice dynamic and camaraderie, but we also didn't manage to be there long enough to like be at each other's throats over anything. One of the best parts of it that I remember is that myself and one of the PhD students eventually got into like a music contest where we would play songs to try and one-up each other. So he would play one song and then I'd play one that I thought was better. Mostly stuff from the 80s and like real classic material, but we had a lot of fun with that. And it was nice that because it was a lab season and we weren't excavating, we could do things like listen to music while we were working. It was also during this field school that I encountered a scorpion for the first time ever, which was quite a surprise considering all the time I spent in the Middle East. But yeah, it happened in Bulgaria. It must have just like been crawling on one of the bags that we had skeletons in the nice dark warehouse that they were in. It was found on one of our benches and caused quite a kerfuffle when it was found. Myself and one of the PhD students who had both worked in the Middle East and been told about scorpions were both like, okay, we gotta kill it because it was small and like brown/clear, which usually means that that scorpion is probably going to be deadly. One of our more tender-hearted colleagues wanted to like put it onto a book and go put it somewhere else to like live its life. And while she was trying to convince us of that, the PhD student came up behind her and then just dispatched the scorpion with a very thick textbook. Working up in the island in the run-up to peak tourist season also meant that we were Subject to musical performances, which were probably some of my most vivid memories of this trip, and they haunt me to this day. The museum we were working at was next door to a restaurant, which is not really that unusual in Nessebar. I would say like the majority of businesses there are either tourist shops or restaurants. And I guess at some point, partway through a season, their house band came in to start practicing for when they were going to do their performances for all the tourists. And normally, I don't think that this would have been that big of a deal or a problem, and I don't know if I'd necessarily call it a problem anyway, but they weren't very good, no offense. And their repertoire seemed to be limited to the songs Rolling in the Deep and Purple Rain. I will never forget the sound of that woman's voice singing Purple Rain for the rest of my life. I will never be able to listen to either of those songs again in the same way that I did before. After hearing them over and over and over again for the last like 2 weeks that we were there, it was the opposite of a treat for my ears, I must say. We didn't get the chance to do any like big excursions or field trips as a part of this field school, partially because it was quite short, but we did get a chance to explore the island. We got a tour from the local archaeologist of a bunch of like the major churches. We also got to go to the local archaeological museum and look around that quite a bit. We did end up going to Sunny Beach one evening, but we didn't actually end up doing anything there. I think we just walked around for a bit and then we went home. Most of our off time was spent just kind of relaxing, and then on like weekends or once or twice a week we would all go out for dinner, and then on the weekends we would usually go out for a drink somewhere. A special mention here to the Cave Bar in Bulgaria, which looks like a bunch of like stalagmites and stalactites from the ceiling, and they've got like little wooden chairs and fountains and stuff like that. It's a really, really cool place. The field school was over before I knew it. It went by super, super quickly, as time does when you're having fun. I had a really wonderful time while I was there. I really enjoyed the experience, and the work that I did end up contributing in part to my research for my thesis, so that was quite useful for me. And it was a great experience to be able to go from working on the material to then following it through and actually like writing about it as well. That's it for today, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Please put any questions, comments, or concerns in the comment section below. Have you been to Nessebar? Are you potentially planning to go there? Has this inspired you to go there? Have you ever heard of vampire burials before? If you'd like to follow me on my other social media accounts, my Instagram and Twitter are also in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching, everybody, and I'll see you next time. Bye!